Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. So, the first two episodes of the AFC North edition of Hard Knocks is dropped, and I got a lot of thoughts about it. But before I get into it, let me know in the comment section if this is something that you would want to see more of as these episodes come out. I'm thinking of maybe doing bi-weekly, but if there's enough demand, I'll do it weekly. But I wanted to let a couple of episodes bundle up before I really gave this show an endorsement one way or the other. I will say this before I get into the details of the episode. If you like Hard Knocks, you're going to really like this season of Hard Knocks, this in-season edition of Hard Knocks for a number of reasons. I think one of the main reasons that makes this season of Hard Knocks, or at least this season edition of in-season Hard Knocks, so compelling is not just that they're looking at 4 different organizations at one time. I think that is a fun twist that they're adding on there. And I don't think they have to stick to the divisional format, right? Maybe they could do similar to how QB1 did, where they follow 4 teams with franchise quarterbacks or teams with different levels of quarterbacks, one with the rookie, right? They can switch up how they want to do the multi-team format, but that multi-team format I do think works, right? Because it cuts out a lot of the dead weight that you usually get in a season of Hard Knocks, or the repetition that you usually get, or the false drama that usually gets drawn up when you're doing a 4-team season of Hard Knocks. There's just not a lot of room for a lot of fluff. So what you do get is really good and really compelling. And I'll talk about some of those elements in just a minute. I also think what makes this season of Hard Knocks unique, outside the obvious structure of it, is that they're looking at 4 organizations that they usually wouldn't be able to get a look at in one season. If you're familiar with what the criteria is for teams that can deny being on Hard Knocks, the Browns, the Bengals, I think the Steelers, and the Ravens all qualify for franchises that could say no technically to Hard Knocks. Now, I don't know if they enforce this rule anymore, but it used to be the NFL could force a team to do Hard Knocks even if they didn't want to, as long as they weren't coming off a playoff appearance or they didn't have like a first-year head coach or something like that, right? Kind of just looking at how different teams motivate themselves based on where they're at, right? And I think the second episode did a really good job of this. I think that second episode of the in-season AFC North Hard Knocks might be the best episode of this season because it just did a really good job of highlighting the Browns and Steelers rivalry, why it matters geographically, why it matters historically, and also why it matters to the individuals that have played in that rivalry, right? They did a great job highlighting Joey Porter, passing on the stories of that rivalry to Joey Porter Jr. And then you found out an interesting tidbit where, like, Joey Porter is so paranoid about the hatred that the Browns fans have for him, the hatred that Bengals fans have for him, and the hatred that Raven fans have for him, that he does not eat in those cities because he thinks he's going to get his food tampered with. And if you've been around these rivalries long enough, if you're somebody who grew up with these rivalries like I have, like, yeah, that's fair. Like, that could happen in Cleveland to Joey Porter Jr. Like, I understand, not Joey Porter Jr., but Joey Porter for sure. Like, yeah, he definitely could happen to him. He's super recognizable, and he was definitely enemy number 1 back in those days, or to anybody who remembers the Steelers, that Bill Cowher carnation of them, right, before Mike Tomlin got there. But this episode did a great job highlighting the Browns-Steelers rivalry. It also did a great job of showing you the contrast between how Kevin gets the job done and how Mike Tomlin gets the job done, right? Because they kind of set it up in the second episode where these two teams that are playing each other, obviously they have the goal to win the game, but they also have different secondary goals, right? With Kevin Stefanski, it is, how do you motivate a team when they are mathematically eliminated from the playoffs? How do you keep a team playing hard when, if you look at the basic way that we look at football, right, where it's like, okay, the incentive to play is to win. Well, there's no incentive to win right now because you can't get to the play. How do you motivate them guys, right? I think Shelby Harris had an interesting speech during this episode where he talked about, like, hey, you're being evaluated. They're determining right now if you're going to be brought back, if you're going to be part of the solution, or if you're going to be part of the problem. Like, that's going to be a real thing over these next few weeks, right? Like, if guys are lollygagging, if guys aren't really giving it their full effort, there's no reason to just like hang on and see what happens with it, right? The Browns have already brought in a kicker. Might mean that Dustin Hopkins will be on his way out faster than anybody thinks right now. Kadarius Toney got the boot super fast. Like, he's trying to give these guys game, which is, you got to play hard. And also, when they showed kind of the mic'd up version of the Browns Steelers game, they did a great job of highlighting the fact that somebody like Myles Garrett, who he's not in evaluation mode right now, right? Myles Garrett's not in danger of being cut. Myles Garrett is not in danger of losing his spot because he has a down rest of the year. But they showed Myles Garrett like playing through a nasty cough that he had. I don't know what caused it, like if it was like the flu or something like that, or if he just had a nasty cough. But they showed him playing through that cough, and I think that paired nicely with everything else that they laid in with the Browns storyline in this episode, right? With Shelby Harris's speech, where Kevin's on the big board and he shows that pick six and he's like, hey, look at the effort to make the tackle. Look how fast we're running to make the tackle. And he's making a point about effort. And what he's also doing by putting that on the big screen is letting you know that they're watching that kind of stuff, right? They're watching the people who don't put in the effort, who aren't hitting their max speeds. I think that's the reason he highlights it. So right? Because he did it in front of the whole team. He showed it. And if you just watch it on first glance, you're like, okay, he's just highlighting the fact that these guys ran hard. But what he's also doing is putting you on notice, like, hey, if you drag ass, we're going to see it. And then you pair that with Shelby Harris. And then you also look at somebody like Myles. And Myles is not the greatest vocal leader. He does not have that gift, right? He's been gifted with many things, but he's not going to be able to give the greatest speech in the world or whatever it is, or that doesn't seem like something that's in his bag. I mean, that's fine. But what I think Myles does do well as a leader is lead by example. And that's one of those things, right? He's coughing up a storm. He's sick as hell. He clearly was not 100%, but he's fighting throughout the whole game and fighting really hard to make that point of like, hey, I'm busting my ass. I'm Myles Garrett. I'm the one dude out here who could get away with not busting his ass right now. So if I'm doing it, you're doing it. And that's why you've seen the effort from the defense. I think Myles has taken that personal, because there were times this season where the effort didn't look great on the defensive end, and it did start at the line of scrimmage, and it wasn't Myles that didn't have the effort, but Myles kind of like has taken that responsibility up with Shelby Harris, and they have definitely improved that part of it, right? Now, I wish it led to more wins, obviously, but that's a nice little thing to see when you're talking about, are the Browns building a culture? Are they doing things that make you feel like they're not going to be losers year in and year out? Like, is this just going to be a temporary down year? Or are we going to just be like this forever? That's the kind of stuff that gives me hope that they're not going to be like this, because that's a change in mindset. That's a culture difference, right? Like, I'm not going to be out because I'm a little sick. I'm going to play through all of this. I'm going to still go as hard as possible in the fourth quarter of this game, even though I'm huffing and wheezing. And if I'm doing it and I'm Myles Garrett and everybody sitting at home thinks I should be just sitting if I get a bruise or a nick because you don't want me to miss any time next year, get injured or something like that, then you definitely got to do it, right? If you're Isaiah McGuire or Mike Hall or somebody like that. So I liked seeing that. Now, they also showed off like how Mike Tomlin motivates his guys in Pittsburgh, and it's definitely a different style than all of the other AFC North coaches. And I think also it's a fun thing about this season is that all of these coaches have a different style, right? If you look at John Harbaugh is super complimentary, right? He is the nicest guy in the world when you watch these mic'd up. He's just talking about how excited he is to see Lamar Jackson. He has nothing but enthusiasm. And that makes sense. He's a special teams coach, right? And special teams coaches, you can't be my way or the highway with special teams coaches because you ask everybody for a favor if they doing special teams. So he has a more complimentary way of going about it, right? Of motivating his guys, of connecting with his guys. Mike Tomlin's approach is an approach I can only define as the most coachingist approach of coaching history. Like, Mike Tomlin is your favorite coach's coach. Like, that is what Mike Tomlin just, everybody has had a coach at some point in their life, no matter what sport they've played, or even if you haven't played a sport, no matter what activity you've done, that reminds you of Mike Tomlin, because Mike Tomlin is coach, right? Like, he does all the coach. He dressed like coach. He just such a coach. That's the best way I could describe it. But it's like this weird kind of mix between, being able to relate with you on more of a casual level while also carrying the respect of an elder. Right? Like, you can make a joke with Mike Tomlin, but you're not going to get too familiar with Mike Tomlin, right? Like, you're not about to get comfortable on Mike Tomlin's couch and kick your feet up and shit. But you can make a joke with Mike. You can have a little insider as long as it's appropriate or whatever it is. Like, Mike Tomlin just relates to you like that, and it's a different approach. And then you have Kevin, whose approach I think kind of fits neatly in between John Harbaugh's approach and Mike Tomlin's approach, because he is complimentary to his guys. The way he's complimentary is he loves his numbers, right? He loves bringing up the miles per hour and all that. Like, he brings up that kind of stuff, and then he compliments you based on what it is that you achieve. But he's not like as flowery as John Harbaugh is. Like, John Harbaugh almost comes off like a hippie sometimes with how like nice he just walks in. Wow, how's the build? Like, he's really, really friendly in there. Now, obviously, if you ever watch like a Ravens game, he's not that friendly all the time. Like, he be yelling at dudes and yelling at the refs all the time. And maybe that's like his good cop, bad cop thing going on there. Kevin shows this thing where Kevin Rice is like interesting line where he doesn't show a ton of emotion, but he definitely shows gratitude towards his guys and the efforts that they put in. And he makes it clear that he's paying attention to that. It's an interesting approach. It seems to work for him. It seems like it works for the guys in that building. And you could just see by watching the relationship that the coaches have, the difference between what players culturally could work in different situations, right? Like, I don't think George Pickens would work in Baltimore, for example, because he needs somebody who's going to be willing to be that disciplinarian, right? Willing to say that hard thing to him. Mike Tomlin is willing to do that. He will also be your friend, but he's also going to tell you when you're wrong. That's the approach that Mike Tomlin has. I don't think that George Pickens would work in Cleveland. I don't think that George Pickens would work in Baltimore or Cincinnati. He needs what Mike Tomlin provides. That's why that kind of player works really well in Pittsburgh, right? And there's a certain type of player that'll work really well in Baltimore. There's a certain type of player that works really well in Cleveland. And there's a certain type of player that works really well with how Zach Taylor approaches the game. And the way Zach Taylor approaches the game is, hey, Joe, get it done, buddy. Like, of all the coaches, he has the most hands-off approach on this. And I don't blame him, right? Like, he knows where his bread is buttered. His bread is buttered because number 9's really, really good. And he doesn't have as much as a imprint on his organization because of that. That Kevin or Mike or John have over theirs. But what I do think is interesting is because that is the case, you can truly see the Cincinnati Bengals. Zach Taylor's the head coach, but that's Joe Burrow's team. Like, nothing goes down without number 9 in Cincinnati. And that also means Zach Taylor keeping his job, right? Like, if Joe says no on that, then it's gone, bruh. Like, it's clear to me when you watch this that this is what that organization is and that team is that's Joe Burrow's team. Even in and it's not just because he's a franchise quarterback. Lamar Jackson, a franchise quarterback, a multiple-time MVP, which Joe Burrow is not. And you don't get that vibe in Baltimore that it's Lamar's show. You get the vibe that John Harbaugh is really grateful for Lamar Jackson, that the Baltimore Ravens love having Lamar Jackson play for them, but you don't get the vibe that it's Lamar's show. That is John Harbaugh's show. Lamar's the quarterback and the most important player on that show, but it's still John's. Cincinnati, that shit is Joe's. But all in all, I thought those are kind of my takeaways from the first 2 episodes and kind of my takeaways, how I see it as somebody who covers not just the Cleveland Browns, but the AFC North. I think it's an interesting insight into how these teams operate and how that changes the personalities that they feel like could work or could not work in Cleveland, in Baltimore, in Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. And it's just interesting how certain personalities really would only work at one of those places, even though I think all 4 of those franchises are pretty functional operations at the end of the day, right? Like, I don't think any of these operations are dumpster fires or anything like that. But that's my thoughts after watching Hard Knocks. If you've watched it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.